The Acclamator could land on a planet, deploy 16,000 troops, and be back in orbit before most capital ships finished their bombardment runs. 17 minutes. That's all it took. From atmospheric entry to final ramp extension, a 752-meter warship could touch down on alien soil and unleash an entire army. 80 gunships, 48 walkers, 36 mobile artillery platforms, all operational before the enemy finished updating their threat assessments. So why did the Empire scrap them? You already know the answer. You've been asking this question in comment sections for years. And here's the thing. You were right. The Empire didn't abandon the Acclamator because they found something better. They abandoned it because it didn't look scary enough. Let me show you exactly why your instincts about this ship were correct all along. Picture the problem Rathana Heavy Engineering faced around 32 BBY. The Kaminoans were growing a secret clone army under the authorization of Jedi Master Sifo Dyas. That army needed transport. Not just any transport, assault transport. Ships that could deliver ground forces directly to planetary surfaces without relying on shuttle relays that took hours and left troops vulnerable during descent. Naval architects of that era considered the requirement borderline impossible. A warship exceeding 700 meters in length entering atmosphere? The structural stresses during descent would tear conventional capital ship designs apart. Thermal loads during re-entry should melt the hull. And landing gear capable of supporting a vessel that size on potentially unstable terrain? Nobody had ever built anything like it. But Rathana's engineers, working in absolute secrecy as a subsidiary of Kuat Drive Yards in the Outer Rim, figured it out. They developed a revolutionary hull geometry that distributed heat across the entire ventral surface during re-entry. The underside of the Acclamator wasn't just armor, it was a heat sink, designed to absorb and radiate the tremendous thermal energy generated by atmospheric friction. They created retractable stabilizer assemblies that shifted the ship's center of mass throughout the descent profile, automatically compensating for changing aerodynamic conditions as the vessel dropped from vacuum into increasingly dense atmosphere. And the landing gear itself represented engineering without precedent. Hydraulic struts designed to support approximately 35 million metric tons, the ship's full combat weight, even on uneven or partially compromised terrain. Think about what that means. You're not landing on a prepared runway. You're landing on a battlefield. Cratered ground, rubble, slopes. The gear had to handle all of it. The struts themselves used multi-stage hydraulic dampening systems that could absorb landing shock across a remarkable range of descent velocities. Too fast, and conventional landing gear would buckle, driving the strut straight through the hull. Too slow, and you're a sitting target during final approach. The Acclamator system threaded that needle with engineering precision that still impresses naval architects who study the design. Landing gear. On a warship this size. For a ship that could also fight in space, carry an entire division, and jump to hyperspace at class 0.6, faster than most contemporary capital ships. Let's talk numbers for a moment. Not exhaustive technical specifications, just the ones that prove the Empire made a catastrophic mistake. The Acclamator-class assault ship measured 752 meters in length, 160 meters in beam, and approximately 200 meters in height, including sensor arrays. That Class 0.6 hyperdrive rating exceeded the performance of most contemporary capital ships, allowing rapid strategic redeployment between theaters of operation. Maximum atmospheric velocity reached 12,000 kilometers per hour, meaning once landed, an Acclamator could reposition across an entire continent within planetary operational zones faster than ground forces could track it. Troop capacity stood at 16,000 clone soldiers in standard configuration. Variants achieved capacities up to 20,000 through reduction of vehicle complement. But here's what matters. Those troops came with organic support. The 80 LAAT/I gunships carried in the ship's hangar bays provided immediate air support that deployed simultaneously with ground forces, eliminating the coordination delays inherent in separate air and ground transport arrangements. The 48 ATTE walkers gave landing forces immediate heavy armor. The 36 SPHAT artillery platforms provided fire support capable of engaging enemy armor concentrations or hardened positions from the moment deployment completed. Armament consisted of 12 quad turbo laser turret emplacements, 24 point defense laser cannons, optimized for anti-starfighter and ground support roles, and 4 missile launch tubes capable of deploying proton torpedoes. The weapons arrangement prioritized ground support over ship-to-ship combat, with firing arcs specifically designed to provide covering fire during descent and landing operations. And the water landing capability? Specialized ballast compensation systems allowed amphibious assault operations without any modification. Acclamators could set down on oceanic surfaces, maintain stable position through wave action, and deploy amphibious vehicles directly into surf zones. Another dimension of operational flexibility unavailable in any comparable vessel class. Now, some people compare the Acclamator to the Venator-class Star Destroyer. Fair comparison, both Republic workhorses, both designed for combined arms operations. The Venator gets more love from Clone Wars fans, and for good reason. Gorgeous ship, excellent fighter carrier capacity. The Venator stretched over 1,000 meters, dwarfing the Acclamator in raw size. But here's the difference that mattered for ground assault. Yes, the Venator could land. It had the capability. But the Acclamator was purpose-built for planetary assault from the keel up. Every system optimized for getting troops from orbit to ground as fast as physically possible. The Venator was a carrier that could land. The Acclamator was an assault ship that happened to fly in space. The Venator's primary role involved fleet engagement and fighter operations. Planetary insertion was a secondary capability. The Acclamator existed for planetary insertion. Period. That distinction would prove critical in actual combat. The Battle of Geonosis in 22 BBY validated everything Rothana's engineers had promised. The Clone Wars begin not with a skirmish, but with a full-scale planetary invasion, and the Acclamator class gets its trial by fire. Master Yoda arrives in the Geonosis system with the first wave of Acclamators, carrying the newly revealed Grand Army of the Republic. The Separatists have droid armies deployed across the planet's surface. Geonosian foundries churning out battle droids by the thousand. A conventional assault, establishing orbital superiority, then spending hours ferrying troops down via shuttle, would give the Separatists time to concentrate forces, fortify positions, turn every landing zone into a kill box. Yoda doesn't give them that time. He orders the Acclamators straight down. Picture what happens next. 752 meters of warship, nose angled toward the planet's rust-colored surface, beginning atmospheric entry. The hull heats. The air screams around the ship's profile. Point defense lasers tracking for any Geonosian fighters stupid enough to approach during descent. And below, Separatist tactical computers registering the contacts, calculating trajectories, and arriving at conclusions their programming insists must be sensor errors. Capital ships don't land. That's not how this works. Except these capital ships do. Admiral Wolf Yularen, coordinating fleet movements, documented what happened next. 17 minutes from atmospheric entry to full deployment. The Acclamators touched down across multiple landing zones, their massive landing struts absorbing the impact, hydraulics hissing as the ship settled onto Geonosis's rocky terrain. Before the dust clouds cleared, deployment ramps crashed open. 16,000 clone troopers poured from each ship, not trickling down in shuttle loads over hours, flooding out in organized waves, unit after unit, their white armor catching Geonosis's harsh light. Gunships launched from hangar bays, 80 LAAT/I transports per ship providing immediate air support. ATTE walkers rolled down vehicle ramps, their heavy legs finding purchase on the alien ground. Spate mobile artillery platforms, 36 per ship, established fire positions and began targeting Separatist armor concentrations before the droids had finished repositioning to meet this impossible assault. The Separatist commanders had built their entire defensive strategy around a fundamental assumption. Any Republic assault would require hours of shuttle relay operations. Hours they'd use to reposition droid armies, contest landing zones, establish overlapping fields of fire that would grind down each shuttle wave in detail. The mathematics of conventional orbital assault favored the defender. Always had. The Acclamator rewrote that mathematics in 17 minutes. Mace Windu, the Jedi Master who'd led the arena rescue that precipitated the larger battle, who'd watched 200 Jedi reduced to fewer than 30 in the fighting, later credited the Acclamator's landing capability as the single factor that transformed a desperate extraction into strategic victory. Not the Jedi's combat prowess, not the clone troopers' training and discipline. The ship's ability to put boots on the ground before the enemy could react. And Geonosis wasn't a fluke. This was doctrine. The Clone Wars lasted 3 years. The Acclamator class saw deployment in over 140 separate engagements. 140 times, Republic commanders called for planetary assault capability, and 140 times, the Acclamator delivered. The operational pattern held consistent across wildly different tactical situations: rapid insertion, combined arms deployment, mission success before the enemy adapted. The Battle of Christophsis in 22 BBY demonstrated what the Acclamator could do under truly contested conditions. Separatist Admiral Trench, a harsh tactical genius with a reputation for breaking blockade runners, had established orbital superiority over Christophsis. His fleet formed an interlocking defensive pattern that conventional military wisdom deemed impenetrable. Below, Jedi General Anakin Skywalker and his new Padawan, Ahsoka Tano, held a deteriorating position, with clone forces taking increasing casualties. They needed reinforcement immediately. Getting it seemed impossible. Admiral Yularen, commanding the relief fleet, studied Trench's formation and found something: a gap. Brief, maybe a few minutes before Trench's patrol patterns closed it. Not enough time for conventional shuttle deployment, but enough time for something else. The Acclamators punched through. They hit atmosphere while Trench's blockade still partially covered the space above them. Separatist batteries fired on the descending ships. Point defense lasers on the Acclamators answered, swatting missiles and fighter attacks, while the vessels continued their screaming descent. Hull plates glowed with re-entry heat. The ships shuddered through turbulence that would have torn shuttlecraft apart. They landed. And then they did something that truly demonstrated the class's versatility. The Acclamators didn't just deploy troops and lift off. They stayed. Their turbolaser batteries, 12 quad turret emplacements per ship, designed with firing arcs specifically optimized for ground support, pivoted towards separatist armor formations and opened fire. The same weapons that could engage enemy frigates in space carved through separatist tank columns on the surface. Troops deployed behind covering fire from their own transport ship. Air support launched, while artillery bombardment suppressed enemy positions. Combined arms integration at a level no shuttle-based deployment could match. Versatile. That's the word that keeps coming up. And yes, I know you've been using that exact word in the comments. You were paying attention. The Umbara campaign of 21 BBY pushed the Acclamator's capabilities in a different direction: extended ground operations on a hostile world. Umbara, the Shadow World, a planet of perpetual darkness, bioluminescent flora, and an indigenous population that had sided with the Separatists. The terrain favored defenders. The darkness favored ambush. The campaign would require sustained operations over days or weeks, not the rapid strike-and-withdraw actions that characterized most Clone Wars engagements. Jedi General Pong Krell commanded Republic forces. The tactical situation demanded not just troop deployment, but ongoing logistical support: medical evacuation, ammunition resupply, vehicle repair, command coordination. In a conventional operation, all of this would require establishing fixed ground bases, vulnerable to enemy attack and dependent on continuous shuttle supply from orbiting vessels. The Acclamator eliminated that vulnerability by becoming the base. Captain Rex of the 501st Legion, one of the most experienced clone officers in Republic service, documented operations from the Acclamator maintaining station at the primary landing zone. The ship's medical bays received wounded clones, treating injuries that would have been fatal without rapid surgical intervention. Armories dispensed fresh ammunition and replacement weapons. Maintenance crews in the vehicle bays worked around the clock, repairing damaged ATTEs and returning them to combat operations. The ship didn't leave. It stayed. Because it could stay. Because Rathana's engineers had designed it to operate as a forward operating base, not just a delivery vehicle. Clone troopers fighting in Umbara's endless night knew that support waited behind them. Not hours away in orbit, dependent on shuttle windows and landing zone security, right there, on the ground, ready. The Ryloth campaign, also in 21 BBY, showed what happened when Acclamators operated at the strategic level. Separatist forces under Tactical Droid Commander TX-20 had occupied Ryloth's major population centers. The Twi'lek populations suffered under droid occupation. Liberation required not just defeating TX-20's forces, but doing so quickly enough to prevent the Separatists from using civilian hostages as shields. Jedi General Mace Windu developed an assault plan that exploited Acclamator capabilities to their fullest. Rather than a single concentrated landing that TX-20 could respond to, Windu ordered simultaneous landings at 3 geographically separated points, 3 Acclamators, 3 landing zones, 17 minutes each to full deployment. The forces converged on Separatist positions from multiple vectors. TX-20's tactical programming demanded response to the most threatening axis of advance, but by the time his droid processors calculated which landing posed the greatest danger, all 3 were complete. His defensive forces, positioned to contest a single landing zone, found themselves flanked and encircled by Republic armor, advancing from directions they couldn't simultaneously defend. Commander Pons, serving under Windu, reported primary objectives achieved in under 6 standard hours, a campaign that conventional deployment would have stretched across days, giving Separatists time to entrench, fortify, threaten civilian populations, compressed into a single morning of coordinated assault. This was what the Republic built. A ship designed for practical military effectiveness, combined arms integration, operational flexibility, speed that denied enemies reaction time, and the Empire threw it away. The transformation happened fast. In 19 BBY, Chancellor Palpatine declares himself Emperor, the Republic becomes the Galactic Empire, and everything changes. Within the first year of Imperial rule, a man named Wilhuff Tarkin started reshaping military philosophy. Tarkin had served the Republic during the Clone Wars, risen through ranks that valued tactical effectiveness. But Tarkin saw something else in the Empire's future. Not a military force designed to win battles. A military force designed to prevent battles through overwhelming terror. The Tarkin Doctrine. You've probably heard the name. Here's what it actually meant for Imperial procurement decisions. Military assets should project such overwhelming power that opponents submit without fighting. The psychological impact of a weapon system matters more than its tactical effectiveness. Cost effectiveness? Irrelevant. Operational flexibility? Unnecessary. If populations see enough destructive capability, they'll surrender before you need to use it. Tarkin formally articulated this philosophy during a HoloNet interview, following his elevation to Grand Moff in 14 BBY. But the doctrine had shaped Imperial decisions for years before that interview. From 19 BBY onward, every procurement choice, every ship design, every resource allocation reflected Tarkin's core belief: rule through fear of force rather than force itself. This philosophical framework directly contradicted everything the Acclamator represented. The Acclamator was engineered for practical military effectiveness, rapid deployment, operational flexibility, combined arms integration. It won battles efficiently. These qualities, while tactically invaluable, generated minimal psychological impact on civilian populations. An Acclamator landing on a planet and deploying troops demonstrated competence, professional military capability, the ability to accomplish objectives. It didn't inspire terror. Grand Moff Tarkin wanted terror. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer became his instrument. 1,600 meters long, more than twice the Acclamator's length. Armament sufficient to reduce planetary surfaces to molten slag. When an Imperial Star Destroyer entered a system, its visual profile alone communicated absolute dominance. The wedge-shaped hull filling viewports, the shadow falling across planetary surfaces, the sheer, overwhelming presence declaring that the Empire had arrived, and resistance meant annihilation. But here's what the Imperial-class Star Destroyer couldn't do. Land. No landing gear. No atmospheric insertion capability. No direct ground deployment. A ship 1,600 meters long, putting troops on a planet, required shuttle relays. Sentinel-class landing craft, carrying approximately 54 soldiers per trip. Lambda shuttles, ferrying officers and specialists. Back and forth, orbit to surface, surface to orbit, trip after trip after trip. Imperial Army liaison officers documented the timeline differential in operational assessments that apparently nobody in high command bothered to read. An Acclamator achieved full force projection in 17 to 23 minutes. Atmospheric entry to boots on ground to vehicles operational to air support launched. An Imperial Star Destroyer required between 4 and 7 hours to fully deploy its troop complement, and that assumed uncontested landing zones. Contested deployments, enemies firing on shuttles during descent, anti-aircraft positions targeting each landing craft, extended timelines significantly. Shuttle losses required multiple relay cycles to achieve equivalent ground strength. Hours became days, and the Star Destroyer carried fewer troops to begin with. 9,700 stormtroopers, standard complement, roughly 60% of what an Acclamator hauled. The shuttles themselves introduced vulnerabilities the Acclamator had eliminated entirely. Sentinel-class landing craft and Lambda shuttles transiting from orbit to surface became targets for ground-based anti-aircraft systems, planetary fighter defense, and even handheld missile weapons. Clone Wars-era Acclamators had faced similar threats during their own descents, but their military-grade hull armor and 24-point defense batteries provided protection that shuttlecraft simply could not replicate. A lucky shot could bring down a shuttle carrying 54 soldiers. A lucky shot against a descending Acclamator just scorched the paint. So the Empire replaced a ship that could land 16,000 troops in 17 minutes with a ship that couldn't land at all, carried fewer soldiers, and took 7 hours to deploy them via vulnerable shuttlecraft. For intimidation. Several Imperial programs attempted to address the ground deployment gap their own doctrine had created. The Gazanti-class cruiser received modifications allowing external mounting of AT-AT walkers, providing rapid, heavy armor deployment for small-scale operations. These vessels could deliver perhaps a platoon-equivalent force, where Acclamators had delivered divisions. The modifications represented tactical improvisation rather than strategic solution, a bandage on a wound the Empire had inflicted on itself. Admiral Conan Antonio Moti, the same officer who would later dismiss the force as a sad devotion to that ancient religion, while standing on the Death Star, personally advocated for accelerated Acclamator decommissioning during his tenure in Imperial Navy procurement. His argument? Maintaining Acclamators diverted resources from more impressive vessels. More impressive, not more effective, not more tactically sound. Impressive. New Acclamator construction ceased entirely by 17 BBY. The shipyard capacity at Rathana Heavy Engineering that had produced these vessels got redirected to Imperial-class production. Existing Acclamators underwent systematic capability reduction. Ships assigned to core world defense fleets had their landing systems deactivated and ground assault equipment removed. They became cargo transports. Vessels in outer rim sectors received minimal maintenance priority, some suffering decommissioning purely through accumulated mechanical failures that went unrepaired because nobody cared enough to fix them. By 14 BBY, the year Tarkin formally announced his doctrine, fewer than 300 Acclamators remained in active Imperial Navy registry. Of those, approximately 180 served in converted transport configurations without assault capability. 60 to 80 retained full operational status, but received assignments to secondary sectors where their presence wouldn't contrast embarrassingly with the newer, scarier designs the Empire preferred. The remainder? Mothballed. Cannibalized for parts. Sold to planetary defense forces with mandatory capability restrictions, ensuring the ships could never operate at original specifications. The transfer pattern followed consistent rules. Core world systems with reliable Imperial loyalty received vessels stripped of heavy weapons and landing capability, suitable for system patrol duties. Outer Rim governors occasionally purchased complete vessels, though Imperial Navy policy mandated capability restrictions that prevented these ships from operating at original specifications. Approximately 40 Acclamators entered the hands of private security corporations, corporate sector defense fleets, and similar quasi-governmental organizations between 15 and 10 BBY. The Empire didn't just stop using the Acclamator. They actively worked to make sure nobody else could use it properly either. And here's where the consequences get interesting. General Jan Dodonna served as a Republic naval officer during the Clone Wars. He'd coordinated with Acclamator assault groups. He'd seen the 17-minute deployments. He understood what those ships could do. When Dodonna became chief architect of Rebel Alliance military strategy during the Yavin era, he built doctrine around a specific Imperial vulnerability. Ground response times measured in hours, not minutes. His tactical briefings to Alliance forces emphasized exploitation windows. Star Destroyers establish orbital superiority. That's inevitable. The Empire has more ships. But between orbital control and actual boots on ground? 4 to 7 hours. That's your window. Complete objectives and extract before Imperial forces finish shuttle deployment. The Alliance's entire hit and fade doctrine existed because the Empire couldn't land troops fast enough to catch them. The Battle of Hoth in 3 ABY demonstrated this dynamic at strategic scale. Darth Vader achieves orbital superiority over Echo Base. Imperial forces have complete space control. The energy shield protecting the base prevents direct bombardment, but Imperial ground forces will eventually breach it. The rebels appear trapped, except they're not. The ground assault requires conventional walker deployment. AT-ATs march across the frozen plains, visible on sensors from the moment they leave their landing craft. Hours of approach time across kilometers of ice before they reach effective range of the base. Alliance personnel watch them coming. They have time. Time to load transports. Time to evacuate essential personnel. Time to destroy sensitive equipment. Time to escape. When Imperial forces finally breach Echo Base, they find abandoned facilities. The majority of Alliance personnel and equipment gone. Escaped during the prolonged ground approach that Tarkin's doctrine made inevitable. Had the Empire possessed Acclamator-style landing capability, ships touching down at the base perimeter, deploying 16,000 troops directly into the fight, evacuation windows close before the first transport launches. The rebels don't escape. Alliance leadership doesn't survive. The entire trajectory of the galactic civil war changes. But the Empire didn't have that capability anymore. They'd scrapped it for intimidation. Alliance military historians documented this pattern repeating across dozens of engagements throughout the war. Star Destroyers establish orbital control. Shuttle deployment sequences begin. Hours pass. Imperial forces arrive at surface objectives to find abandoned facilities and escaped personnel. The deployment gap the Acclamator was specifically designed to eliminate became a vulnerability the rebellion exploited for 2 decades. Now here's where I need to clearly flag something as speculation. Canon-strict viewers, this paragraph is what-if territory, not established fact. Some fans have wondered, what if the rebellion had gotten their hands on Acclamators? What could they have done with these ships? The Acclamator's internal hangar capacity, originally designed for 80 LAAT gunships and dozens of ground vehicles, represented significant enclosed space. If you stripped out the troop transport configuration and converted it for starfighter operations, you'd potentially have a vessel capable of independent carrier duties. The rebellion desperately needed carrier capacity throughout the war. They operated off converted transports, repurposed freighters, anything that could hold a few fighters. A functional Acclamator, redesigned for starfighter operations, could theoretically carry substantial numbers of X-wings, A-wings, or Y-wings, while maintaining hyperspace capability superior to Imperial Star Destroyers. Class 0.6 hyperdrive, faster than what was chasing it. A mobile strike base. Landing capability for ground resupply. Fighter launch platform for space engagements. The versatility the Empire abandoned could have become the rebellion's most valuable asset. End speculation. Back to what actually happened. The Alliance tried to acquire Acclamators. Alliance procurement officers documented multiple operations specifically targeting these ships throughout the Galactic Civil War. All such operations failed to secure functional vessels. Imperial Navy policy explicitly prohibited Acclamator transfer to any party that might provide vessels to the Alliance. Planetary Defense Forces receiving Acclamators underwent Imperial Security Bureau vetting, with loyalty monitoring continuing throughout the operational lifetime of transferred vessels. Private security corporations purchasing Acclamators faced contractual obligations requiring immediate scuttling if capture by rebel forces became imminent. The Empire would rather destroy these ships than let the rebellion have them, which tells you something about how valuable Imperial leadership actually considered them, when someone else might use them. The few Acclamators that fell out of Imperial control through piracy or governmental collapse proved non-functional. Accumulated maintenance failures from years of neglect. One vessel captured by Hutt cartel forces in 3 BBY required 18 months of shipyard work before achieving basic hyperspace capability. It never regained atmospheric landing function. The capability that made the ship special, gone forever. The Empire didn't just abandon the Acclamator. They made sure the capability died with them. So, the original question: why did the Empire scrap their most versatile warship? The answer isn't complicated. It's embarrassingly simple. Tarkin wanted scary. The Acclamator wasn't scary. It was practical. A ship that lands on planets and deploys troops efficiently doesn't make populations tremble. It just wins battles. Star destroyers make populations tremble. Their kilometer-and-a-half profiles blocking out the sun. Their bombardment capability turning cities to ash. Their sheer, overwhelming visual presence communicating absolute Imperial dominance. Fear. That's what Tarkin built his doctrine around. And fear doesn't require landing gear. But here's the irony that Tarkin never acknowledged, that Modi never calculated, that the Imperial High Command apparently never grasped. The Empire's obsession with intimidation created the operational gaps that allowed the rebellion to survive. Every time a Star Destroyer achieved orbital superiority and then spent 4 to 7 hours deploying ground forces, rebels escaped. Every time Imperial strategy prioritized terror over tactical effectiveness, the Alliance found exploitation windows. Every time the Empire chose impressive over effective, someone got away who shouldn't have. The Death Star was the ultimate expression of Tarkin doctrine. A moon-sized weapon designed purely for psychological impact. Destroy a planet, and every other system falls in line. Fear of force, rather than force itself, taken to its logical extreme. A small thermal exhaust port proved that doctrine's fatal flaw. Turned out inspiring terror wasn't the same as being invincible. You've been asking, why didn't they mass-produce these? For years. You looked at the Acclamator's landing capability, recognized its versatility, and understood something the Imperial High Command refused to accept. Winning battles matters more than looking intimidating while losing them. The Empire chose spectacle over substance, ego over efficiency, doctrine over pragmatism. They traded a ship that could put 16,000 troops on any surface in 17 minutes for a ship that looked scarier hovering uselessly in orbit, while shuttles made their slow, vulnerable trips. That choice cost them the war. You were right about this ship. You recognized what made it special before anyone validated your opinion. The landing gear on a vessel that size, the deployment speed, the operational flexibility. You understood that practical military effectiveness beats theatrical intimidation. Tarkin never figured that out. Neither did Modi, or the procurement officers who redirected shipyard capacity to Star Destroyer production, or the admirals who advocated for scrapping the Acclamator fleet. They looked at a 752-meter warship that could touch down on planetary surfaces and deliver an army in 17 minutes. And they saw a vessel that didn't fit their doctrine. You looked at the same ship and saw potential the Empire wasted. The Acclamator-class assault ship wasn't abandoned because something better replaced it. Nothing ever did. It was abandoned because its designers built it to win battles, and the Empire decided winning battles wasn't the point. Looking scary was the point. The rebellion exploited that mistake for 20 years. Echo Base evacuated. Rebel cells escaped. The Alliance survived long enough to destroy 2 Death Stars and watch the Empire collapse into fragments. All because the Empire scrapped a warship that could have caught them. Subscribe for more stories like this.